Welcome to the Successful Athletes podcast presented by TrainerRoad, where we interview successful athletes to make you a faster cyclist. And today we're joined by Jim Mohler, not Mueller, but Mohler out of Chester County, Pennsylvania. How you doing, Jim?
I'm doing fine. How are you, Jonathan?
Yeah, doing well. I'm excited to do this one with you. We shared your story briefly on Instagram, and it was honestly like one of our most popular Instagram posts of the year so far. People lost their minds with it because you are an athlete at right now. Well, actually, you can say your age. What is your age right now, Jim?
I'm 74 and 3/4. Cyclocross racing age 75. Don't ask me why cyclocross age is your age next year, but it is.
Yeah, that's how it works, right? And Jim, you were able to raise your FTP. You're plateaued more or less at 250, and we're going to go into all this in detail, but you were an a late onset cyclist. So this isn't something you've done for many years, but you were stagnated at around 250 watts, figured that's just the way it's going to be because I'm an older athlete. And then you started using adaptive training and you increased up to 270. That was the thing that blew people's minds on Instagram when we shared about that. But
my mind too.
Yeah. But now you just won Cyclocross National Championships in your division, which is incredible. Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
So I'm going to do the weird storytelling thing where we start at the end, then we work our way backward. But I have to ask you, seeing as how you were not a cyclist your entire life, right? So this isn't like, Matthew Van Der Poel or one of these pro athletes that we see that has dreamed of being a cyclist their entire life.
Compare myself to my Matthew.
But those athletes have had their focus set on this for their entire lives, whatever their achievement is in cycling that they plan to do. What did winning national championships mean for you, considering that it isn't your livelihood, considering that it's a pursuit that's only come around later in life?
Well, it meant that I get to be on a podcast.
I love it.
It's meaningful in that, everybody congratulates you and all that. I get my 15 minutes of fame. Then I'll just go back to being whatever I'm going to be. I still haven't decided what is next for Jim Mohler, but I'm going to keep pedaling, but I don't know whether I'm going to be serious about the next nationals or what happens next.
I like that, taking it one step at a time. Yeah.
Pretty much.
So Jim, we've hinted at this already, but you weren't always an athlete, an athlete that trains regularly. But you weren't also a sedentary individual or anything. But what was your upbringing like with sport in particular? Did you do any sports, or how did you keep yourself active?
Well, as a child, I was asthmatic. I was pretty pathetic. I tried to play baseball, but I did a little, but basically no athletics that amount to anything. Then I outgrew the asthma, somewhere in my 20s, and became kind of a normal adult. In my 30s, we bought farmland, and I became a part-time farmer, part-time construction worker, part-time lumberjack. I had a desk job my whole career. So, but I never got overweight or anything because of all the physical work I did. But it was not athletics. I dabbled in racquetball, I dabbled in swimming, but none of that. I could not possibly call myself an athlete.
What did you do for your desk job?
I spent 50 years in IT, spanning 7 decades, as I like to say.
And you saw a lot of change over that time period too. That was like
don't
my goodness.
Get started on that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Sorry. No, I can.
Different podcast.
Tell you which kind of paper tape to use. We don't want to go there.
So those sort of activities, I mean, when you look at it from a super base level, if you live on a farm, you are a farmer, part-time, at times full-time hours, I'm sure as well. We're forced upon you with that, with how much work has to be done. But that sort of stuff raises your basal metabolic rate, right? Mm-hmm. You're doing a lot of work. That's just the nature of how things go. You mentioned that at some point, I guess, did you ever have any tendencies to go over to endurance sports? Or you mentioned swimming, but usually swimming really isn't experienced at the level of endurance sport. So did you ever think that you would end up being an endurance athlete at this point?
I don't think anyone on this planet expected me to be an endurance athlete. There were no hints of that. In fact, this all started when, I was 57 when some doctor said the words to me that said, "All right, you have to start doing aerobic exercise." Mm-hmm. I told him, "Hey, if I do all the work around the farm, I'd get enough exercise." He said, "Nah, it doesn't work that way. You need to do aerobic exercise." So I started running. I'd run around my driveway, which is like 1/10 of a mile loop. I got up to 7/10 of a mile, and I thought I was doing pretty well. But then gradually I did a little more, and then ultimately I started racing 5Ks. So I guess that's the first time where you could possibly consider me an athlete.
How did that go for you? It's always interesting to see an athlete that now has achieved something, and then looking at how their foray into endurance sport went.
Well, I was mediocre, but then at what age? Yeah, at age 60, I entered a race on my birthday and won.
Hey,
not because there was a 65-year-old guy that beat me. There was a 10-year-old girl that beat me, but they had broken the age brackets into 5-year brackets, so I was the winner. Then I never raced again. In that same time frame, I had started riding my bike around the same course on my property that I ran on, and I liked running, but I loved the cycling. So I did that for a couple of years, and somebody told me about this sport called cyclocross, where you ride your bike off-road, you go over obstacles, and part of my course was inside the pasture, so I'd have to lift the bike up over the fence. So that sounded like cyclocross to me. So I entered a race with the mountain bike, and I even picked the bike up the way I do. I made a fool of myself, for sure.
As we all do with our first races, yeah.
I think I did better than most, because I think there are pictures of me holding the bike in front of me. And there was as far as I know, there was no one in that crowd that said, "Now there's a future national champion."
That brings up a good point, just in general, because boy, I'm guilty of that. We look at an athlete and we tend to, based on our own perceptions and our own opinions, we tend to form an idea about that person right off the bat. We judge, and boy, there's no point in doing that, right? Like, it doesn't get us anywhere.
Right. Well,
yeah.
No, the first race, that doesn't count. But then when I bought a cyclocross bike and started racing, a few races a year. And normally I wasn't last. I'd be next to last. In fact, I named my team, consisting of me, Penn Ultimate. Penn, like
that's
next
good.
to last. Yeah, because that's pretty much where I'd finish. And then that was in 55 plus. I'd race in that category, but there weren't that many people in the race at that time. So I started racing Cat 4 or 5, where there's 100 people, and I'd start way in the back and work. But you could always find someone that was the same capability as you. So I liked racing 4 or 5. So I did that for a few years, maybe a couple of years, just to learn how to ride. Then went back to 4 or 5, or went back to 55 plus, and where I found that I was moderately competitive. I'd finish somewhere in the middle. That seemed fine to me.
Yeah.
In fact, I had broken so many derailers. I don't think I was a very good bike handler. I'd broken so many derailers that I converted my bike to single speed, and I just ride the single speed bike against the guys with gears. Which sounds like a big deal, but it doesn't matter that much. At least the courses around here, gears aren't that big an advantage. So again, I'd finish somewhere in the middle, and I was perfectly happy.
So what made you go take that leap? So, you already took the leap to racing. not being a racer your life, and then you took this leap to racing. So what made you go, I want to go to national championships? Because that is an entirely different level, and typically not a spot where a racer that's finishing somewhere around mid-pack would, end up within that same course of a year.
Well, the key moment in my cycling career was when I accidentally won the Pennsylvania State Championship. So this was in 2014. So I was 67. Mm-hmm. So I was racing 55 plus. First I have to say the state championship in the series here is a race. They just, it's not an accumulation of points or anything. It's just, one of the races is designated as the state championship. And if you win that day, you're the state championship or state champion. And that's it. So I finished somewhere in the middle, as I always do. I went home, never thought about that race again. Then a couple of months later, the organizer sent out emails saying, we're going to go back and figure out how old the old guys were and retroactively break it up into 5-year age brackets. And it turns out that day I was the least slow of the 65 and up guys. So here I am, the state champion. So that's awesome. Sort of seemed like a joke, but then I started looking at the USAC points. The point system that you get for, I don't know how they do the algorithm, but supposedly the points compare people from Colorado to people from Pennsylvania and so forth. And I was actually, in my age bracket, I was actually competitive nationally, according to the points. I thought, that's interesting. In 2 years, I'll be 70. Well, I'll be 69, but racing age 70. Maybe I should go to the nationals and see what happens. So
were you, this seems like competitive tendencies as well, right? Would you consider yourself a competitive person?
Well, I am and I'm not. Like, I don't really, if I had lost the nationals this year, let's say, that's okay. But during a race, I'm going to try to win. So I'm competitive in the moment. Competitive overall, there are people far more competitive than I in that sense.
Sure. Is that a part of your nature? Were you always competitive in different endeavors, whether it was, I'm not sure how the farm work would bring out competition, but perhaps that, and then, your career in IT, or did endurance sport bring out this competitive nature?
I think it's more of the latter, more that endurance sport brought out the competitiveness. I mean, I'm sure there was some competitiveness in my IT career, but that certainly wasn't the defining characteristic.
Sure. Yeah. So where was Nationals the first year you went to it, and what year did you end up going? 2014?
Well, the first year I went to it, 2014, 2015, it was 2014, the end of 2014 that I discovered that I might be competitive. So 2015, I would be the oldest in the age bracket, and the nationals were in Asheville. But I have friends in Asheville that I always wanted to visit. So we did that. I entered the nationals. I was pretty pathetic. And finished 22nd out of 29, I think. But okay, I had been to the nationals.
Yeah.
I got to see what got the initial jitters out of the road.
Yeah, and if I can pause you there, because I want to know what was your reaction? Now you're at the highest level of competitive cyclocross in our country for your age group. Mm-hmm. Did that experience kind of discourage you or scare you off, finishing 22nd out of 29, or did you receive motivation to come back and do better?
Oh, motivation, because I had all the excuses. There was something wrong with my bike, so I was going to run to the pits. So then I halfway running to the pits, I said, let's try to fix this again. I got it fixed. There were plenty of reasons that I could have done better. So, that motivated me for the next year when I would be the youngest in the category.
That's an interesting perspective, because some people could look at that experience and say, everything went wrong. I don't belong here. And that, and as a result, they view nationals because of that experience through a specific colored lens that is negative. Whereas you saw it as things went wrong, so I have opportunity to improve. That's an interesting perspective. Is that something also that you just feel like naturally you have, or have you cultivated that sort of looking for improvement side of things?
Well, I must have it naturally, because it never occurred to me till you said that I could have interpreted the whole thing negatively. So I can't think of any other instances that support that, but that was definitely the case in Asheville.
Good on you for doing that. Yeah, that's awesome. So the next year, that would have been 2016. Was that the year that they were in Reno?
No, that Hartford
was there. Yes. Yeah. And so how'd you regroup and improve for the next year?
Well, let's see. I guess I left out I had bought a better bike, in 2014, or for the 2015 season, I had bought a bike with disc brakes and gears.
Gears that worked.
Yes, they did. So let me think. So I don't think I did anything specific in 2016 other than train a little harder.
Mm. And what was your training like at that point?
Okay. I may get my time. Well, nobody's going to fact check this, but there was a point, I think even before I, got the idea that I was going to try to go to the nationals, that I tried structured training with. Well, my main training is just to ride my the courses on the property. The running course that I had started, that I rode the mountain bike around, had evolved by this time into some semblance of a cyclocross course. But I also started structured training with Chris Carmichael's, what was his book called? The Time Crunched Athlete. Mm-hmm. So I just, using heart rate and, lots of little note cards that I made to try to get all the intervals down. It was really tedious, but I did that for at least a year, maybe a year and a half. And I can remember the moment when I decided to give that up. It was one of my first races where I had to run. There was a long section of mud that I couldn't ride through. So I ran it, and I was dead at the end of that. And I said, okay, structured training is nice, but you need real world training. So I did more. I rode more on my courses and I live on a hill, so I used that hill to run up. I mean, even though it was a hill I could ride, I'd run up that just to get some running practice. So it was things like that I did in preparation for Hartford.
Some proper Rocky Balboa style training, right? Like the very practical, direct application, and that's something that does not get talked about enough. And we're absolutely guilty of that, whether it's on the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast or Successful Athletes podcast, with cyclocross in particular, because it's such a, so it's very skill based on one side of things, and your skill, the higher the skill, the more porous the filter that you pass your power through, if that makes sense, in the sense that it allows your power to be expressed with much greater ease when you have really good skill set, right? Mm-hmm. And then outside of that as well, then you have the running side, the dealing with the mud side, the running up hills side, and all of those things are very important. You have to have them trained, and to train for those, there's the structured training side, which is extremely important, and as of equal importance in cyclocross is your ability to express that fitness, and that's where all of this specific style training comes in. Really smart approach.
Right. Yeah. That's what I meant to say.
Yeah.
Express my fitness.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So how'd everything go thereafter? At some point you went back to structured training. So what ended up causing you to come back to that?
Well, at Hartford, I finished third.
Wow.
And there were more than three people. There were none of us. So, and that was another situation where I did some things wrong that I knew. Well, I was overly aggressive descending and crashed. But yeah, none of that matters. I would not have won, but I would have done better. I could have done better. So again, I was motivated to improve. So the next year, I get my years right, 2017, the local races were 65 plus at that time. So that was actually the most fun year. I'm going to get to the structured training in a minute, but
sure.
So I was still not doing structured training in 2017. But I was racing more than I had before, and it was a competitive year. There were 4 of us that each of whom won at least one race. And there was a points championship. There was the state championship, which, I won that because I was 70. I was the only guy. But I actually I beat the 65-year-olds that day. So, that was a good day. But then the series had a points, cumulative points situation where I had to beat another guy the last 2 races. I didn't have to win the race, but I had to finish ahead of him. So the next to last race, I had to stay ahead of this guy. And we had a great race. This is still my favorite race of all we had. He'd pass me, I'd pass him, back and forth. And then on the last lap, he made this really cool move, got ahead of me, and I couldn't catch him. So, I didn't win that, but that's one of my fondest memories, just that racing back and forth. That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, okay. All right. So it was the next year, 2018. And maybe it was that whole situation that motivated me to, find something to, another step to go up. So that's when I started TrainerRoad. So all of 2018, I did TrainerRoad, first with virtual power. Then I bought a power meter, and that's when I got, I think I started at 225 or something and quickly got up to 250 FTP. And like we said earlier, stayed there all of that year, all the next year. Well, we'll get there.
Yeah.
But,
did you see any changes in your training as a result of bringing structure back in, and this time with power instead of just heart rate? Did you see improvements in your training, or was it difficult to fit in all of that training with the other things you had going on?
Well, no, I was, I did say I spent 50 years in IT. You'll be surprised to hear that I kept a spreadsheet of all my runs, and all my rides, all the work, etc. So I wasn't actually doing any more time. I wasn't putting any more time into training than I had been. It was just that I was doing structure. I did the mid-volume plan, which was about the amount of time I had always spent on the bike. So, but the difference that I noticed was, so 2018, cyclocross is at the end of the year. So that whole, say 9 months, 10 months, I had been using structured training with TrainerRoad. What I observed in racing was that prior to that year, there'd always be a point in the race where, the old guys start a minute behind a younger crew. I think it was 35 pluses started before the 55s and 65 or whatever. And so I'd always get lapped. And that's fine, because in cyclocross, if you finish just ahead of the winner, then you've got to do a whole other lap. So every time the ultimate winner would pass me, I would thank him, because at least I don't have to do that extra lap. And there'd always be a point in the race where somebody would pass me, and I'd say, okay, go ahead. You've earned it. just go out on your own. I won't try to burn another match and catch you. Anyway, so after 1 year or part of a year of structured training, neither of those things happened. Not that, I think I still got lapped, but I no longer thanked the guy. If I have to do another lap, okay, I can do that. And if somebody passed me, I would burn a match to try to catch them. Whether I caught them or not isn't the point. It's just that I no longer had those feelings that I had before structured training. And then 2019, the first couple, so 2 years of structured training, I was noticeably faster. In fact, I put a piece on the forum about this, how the first 2 races, I was beating people, in the 60, I'm in the 70 plus, but I'd beat people in the 60 plus that I had no reason to beat. This was not supposed to happen. And, I just seemed much faster than before. And, eventually those guys trained themselves into shape and things settled out to where I was still finishing in the middle of the pack in the 60s. But, it was a noticeable difference, not just to myself, but even to some of the guys I race against.
Did you see at this point, your FTP had kind of jumped up to around 250 and it kind of stayed there? Was that something that frustrated you, being a person that pays attention to the details, keeps track of things in spreadsheets? Was that something that frustrated you, or did you just accept it? Because as an aging athlete, there's always the question as you're getting older of, well, maybe this is my peak and maybe this is just, and from it's downhill from here, right? So I should be grateful to be able to stay here. That's a narrative that I hear pretty regularly. Was that your perspective, or were you still trying to hunt for something more? Where had you settled on this stagnant FTP?
No, I was quite happy I accepted it. I was quite happy with an FTP that stayed the same because, like you said, senescence kicks in. I don't think we have much to, we can't really stop that process, but, I'm still at least maintaining, if not getting stronger. And this is even before we get to adaptive training, which I'm quite happy with it in the mid 70s. Now, they say that rapid decline starts at age 75. So, we'll see what happens next year.
Yeah.
So far, so good.
So let's talk about the adaptive training side of things. Adaptive training comes out and you start using that. What were the differences that you noticed in your training? What was because you go up to 270 now, so you break away from this plateau and you get better. But what were the differences that you noticed in your training? Was it easier, or was it harder? Were you just getting pushed more? What was the change?
I felt that some of the workouts were easier, and there were there were workouts that I'd mark as very hard, but not too many. And a lot of them were easier than I expected. I thought, gee, I hope this stuff works because, now we're in 2021 and I've got the Nationals in a few months, and some of these workouts don't seem as hard as I might expect them to be. But then when I did the first ramp test after adaptive training, that was my big surprise that I had gone from 250 to 270. Or 250 something. I might have been 256 at that point.
Yeah.
Then went up to 270. So I thought there must be something to this. And I do like it more. That is, I don't mind a day where the workout is easier than I might have expected.
Every day doesn't have to break you down or bring you down to your knees, right?
Exactly. I mean, there are still a few days that bring you. Apparently, it knows best because, my FTP went to 270 and won the national championship. So,
yeah, it's amazing. Were there specific types of work that were more difficult for you, whether it be sweet spot, threshold, VO2, anything like that?
No, it's the long VO2 max, the 15 seconds on or even 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. those aren't too bad. Well, I mean, bad, but
Yeah.
I never say, "Oh my God, I have to lower my FTP or knock the intensity down." I think the only workout that I knocked the intensity down was one of those, I don't know, 3-minute above threshold things.
Yep. 3 to 5 minute VO2 is so hard. It's just that by nature, that's one of the most difficult in terms of perception. It's one of the most difficult ones that you can do.
Yeah. But I hear you guys or people on the podcast say that sweet spot is hard. And that doesn't seem that hard.
Yeah. Isn't it funny how it's so individual for a lot of different athletes? And that's one of the main reasons why we built adaptive training, is so that each athlete's strengths and weaknesses could be handled appropriately. But it's so true. And even in a sport like cyclocross, it's funny because you start to think that, okay, well, it's just nonstop, those short 15 seconds on, 15 seconds off VO2 efforts. But in reality, it's not. Those are the efforts that are most painful, perhaps, so they stick in our mind when we think back to the race. But if you look at the power profile, it's those bridges in between those towers. It's the suspension bridge cable in between that, all the time in between. And that's where we spend the majority of our time. And guess what? It tends to be around sweet spot. So yeah, it's super interesting. Well, anything else change with your training over that time period? Were you still doing all the stuff that you're doing outside in terms of the practical training on your courses on the farm?
Yeah, I did. Well, most of my training besides the workouts I did on the trainer, of course, but then I'd do as many outside workouts as I could. Some of the base phase workouts, there are gravel roads around here that are ideal for those. And even some of the 30-second on, 30-second off, or maybe, I don't know, there were some where I could go up the hill and down the hill and, do some of the intense workouts outside. But mostly I would do the ones that are really specific, I would do on the trainer. And then the days that I just have pettit or something, which is an hour of low power, I would do that on my course and practice cornering or practice going over barriers and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no doubt. Jim, I got to ask, are you bunny hopping the barriers, or are you a pick up and run?
Oh, I am pick up and run. I actually, I'm so bad over, well, not barriers. I'm okay running over barriers, but like there are logs. Some of the courses have logs that you're supposed to hop over. It's got to be a really small log for me. I even signed up for a course online that had 27 steps to teach you how to bunny hop. And I got to step 17 and I couldn't do it. There's something about my physiology that I can't do what needs to be done to bunny hop. Now that may be one of the things I try now that I've achieved the goal of the nationals. Maybe the next step is learn how to bunny hop.
I like it. Yeah. So how did the season of racing going? Because we know that you won the national championship, but how did the season of racing go leading up to this?
Yeah. Well, the 2018, I got to get my numbers right here. 2018, 2019, 2020 was a wipeout, and 2021 were the seasons that they had introduced a 70+ class in our local races, which is pretty much me. There was one other guy the first year. In fact, he won the first race. Then I won the second race, and I don't think there was anybody else in a race that year. So I won 10 races in a row that year, 8 races in a row in 2019. Occasionally there was a competitor. And then 2020 was a washout because of COVID. 2021, I won all 6 races that we had in this series. And I think I had 2 two competitors in one of them. So,
Sure.
it was still sort of a joke that I had won 24 races in a row, but, a little less of a joke. But now I can't even use that joke that I've won 24 races in a row, and even in 2 or 3 of them, I had a competitor. I can't use that joke anymore because now I'm the national champion. So
that's an unfortunate circumstance. Yeah. So were you confident leading into nationals? Were you just, let's see how this goes? I mean, you had raced nationals before. You'd introduced all this structured training. You'd seen an increase in your FTP. So and you had finished third prior to this at a national championship. So were your eyes on first place? Was that the goal coming in?
Of course it was the goal, but it wasn't like, oh my God, if I don't win, this is going to be the end of the world. I just want to have a good race. Ideally one where I compete against somebody. I mean, the ideal race would be if I had, somebody in my age bracket that I did a sprint finish with. Whether I won or lost, that would be the ideal. That didn't happen. I won by 39 seconds, which
wow.
Which means I didn't see the guy behind me. I wasn't aware of where he was. In fact, I wasn't aware that I won because the numbering system was such that there were numbers in our range that weren't in our age group. So I was number 403 and 409 passed me and I couldn't catch him. So I thought, okay. All right, I'm second. That's all right. I had some fun. It turns out 409 was actually in a different age bracket. So slowly dawned on me that I won.
Yeah, and we already talked about what it meant to you, and how that not being a career athlete, not being that's your entire pursuit for your whole year. But I mean, we're looking at hard work for years that you put in, a lot of hard work. And then you get to that point where it pays off. Once again, you don't have anything down the road. But Jim, does that fuel the fire for more racing for you? Or do you feel like the book, the page has been turned to the book and it's a fresh chapter and you'll just do whatever else is next?
Well, that's an excellent question that I haven't answered yet. Remember when I won the 5K race running, I never raced again. We also, my wife and I introduced, we fixed up a couple who now have grandkids. We never fixed up anybody again. So there's a history of, just accomplishing something and then moving on. So I don't know what I'm going to do here. I mean, you have to look ahead to the obituary. Does it read any different if I say I won a national championship, or I won 2 national championships, or I won a national championship and came in third a couple of times? I don't know. I have not really thought that through yet. I mean, it's been 1 week since the race, so I think this is going to have to sink in a little longer before I decide what to do next. Well, one on that note, one thing I have pretty much decided to do next year is at least do the first race, enter in 60 plus rather than 70 plus, because I had that streak going. I won 24 races in a row. I mean, you have to define it just right. I won 24 races that I started, because there were 2 I entered that I didn't start, and
Sure.
But if you define it carefully, yes, I won 24 races in a row. Near the end of that streak, I found that the streak actually mattered, which I don't want a silly streak like that to matter. Just like I don't want to say I have to win the nationals or I'm not successful. Like you guys say, it's the process, not the result that you should focus on. So I kind of want to get rid of that streak. So that, enter a race where I do not win, and then that streak's over. I don't have to worry about that anymore.
Well, be careful, because you might win that one too.
I have a feeling I'm not going to beat the 60 plus guys. There are people that are just another species that
sure
race these things. So,
Jim, looking back at this whole experience, What takeaways would you share with people? Learnings that you have wisdom on your side, you have perspective on your side.
At least.
Yeah. And experience. Also, you have kind of fresh eyes taken to this at a later point in life. You've been to the national championship level, lots of progress over this period of time. So what points would you share to listeners? Just learnings. It doesn't have to be something to necessarily motivate them, but what key learnings would you share with everybody?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that one point I would make is, to somebody that's just starting this, or whether it's cyclocross or running or swimming or any form of exercise, and if they listen to the podcast, this podcast and the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast, or even if they hang around a bike store, you could get intimidated by all this stuff that apparently you have to know with the gear ratios and the tires and the tire pressure. And I didn't bother learning any of that stuff. If you had asked me what bike I have, I know the brand, but I'd have to look up what model it is and gear ratios. I don't have a clue. You can win the nationals without knowing all that stuff. Even the nutrition stuff. Now, I should caveat that saying I married a dietitian, so I've never had to worry about the nuances of nutrition. That's taken care of for me. So you should probably pay more attention to nutrition than I did. But the bike stuff, I just rely on the bike store to keep the bike going, and so far, so good. I would also say that you don't have to have a goal of winning the national championship or anything akin to that. I was perfectly happy in 2014, before I accidentally won the state championship, just riding a single speed bike against guys with gears, finishing somewhere in the middle. It was fine. That was enough for me. But then, everything changed when I started looking at the nationals and getting greedy. Now, whether that would have been a sustainable goal, I don't know. I've now gone 7 years since that point where I said I'm perfectly happy, riding a mediocre bike and finishing with mediocre results. But you probably need a sustainable goal. But the goal doesn't have. The point I'm trying to make is the goal doesn't have to be the nationals. The goal could be far less tangible than that. But really, my goal is to have a good race with somebody, whether we're racing for first or for 15th or 29th. So I guess that's my second point. I don't know if that's advice, but it's something. But then the last point I'd make is, so you do want to win the nationals. My advice there would be do what I did, but more of it. And I don't mean more intervals. I mean, do, say, TrainerRoad. That seems to have worked for me, especially that adaptive training that I feel put me over the edge. Like I said, I won by 39 seconds. If I still had the FTP of 250, would I have had those 39 seconds?
Probably
I don't know.
Not.
270 must have helped.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, enough TrainerRoad advertisement. I'd say do more of the things I didn't do much of. Like I went to 2 clinics the whole time. And the clinic that I went to just before cyclocross season, which if you're in southeast Pennsylvania, it's called Sharpening the Axe, highly recommended. That directly contributed to the sand part of the nationals. I mean, I kicked butt on that sand. Every time I passed somebody, maybe 2 people, and I never really did that much with sand before this clinic, but they show me to keep my weight back and don't worry about following the, just let the front end go. It's going to go whatever. Mm-hmm. doing that clinic really helped me just in I can cite that one specific area where I know it helped me. So I would do more clinics. I would do more training with a coach. I had a coach for one day. In fact, it was March 11th, 2020, the day that the NBA shut down, right before the COVID got serious. His name is Bill Elliston. He helped me with cornering and descending, and that that definitely helped a lot. Mm-hmm. Group rides. I'm spoiled here because I've got the courses on my property. It's so easy just to hop on the bike and run. So I don't ride that much with other people. I would highly recommend doing more of that than I did, and do more of the bike geek stuff. I've managed to get to where I am without actually knowing much, but it would help to do more of that. So that would be my advice to anybody that wants to set a high goal, like going to the nationals or winning the nationals. I did it with cutting a few corners, but that was the stars all aligned for me.
No doubt.
I would do a little more than I did if I really cared about winning the nationals.
Jim, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your story. It's super inspiring to me to allow yourself to have the healthy perspective that you have, and to kind of approach things with curiosity in your racing, and to have fun with it, to take this really practical approach as well to training for cyclocross in particular. All exciting things, and then a fantastic example of achieving something great. Like you said, racing can be a fickle thing. Some days it's great, some days it isn't. You never know who's going to show up and that sort of stuff. But at the same time, you have to be there and you have to give it a shot. And that's what the whole racing experience is about, and you personified that. So thank you. You inspired me. I'm sure I'm speaking for the listeners too. Thanks for inspiring. Jim, you're on the TrainerRoad forum. Is that correct? Is that where people could find you on there?
That's probably the only place they can find me, because social media. Did I mention that I spent 50 years in IT, spanning 7 decades, and I had enough. So I don't do any social media.
Nice.
So I'll check out the forum.
Great.
And, answer whatever needs to be answered.
Fantastic, Jim. Well, thank you very much. If you are curious about how Jim trained with adaptive training, you want to hear about that and see if it can work for you, treat you as an individual too, check it out, TrainerRoad.com. You can sign up. You can build a plan for whatever goal you have, whether that's a race or whether it's not a race at all. You can put that on your calendar, and it'll get you going in the right direction and train you as an individual. So with that said, thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.